The transport ship shook violently as it broke through the thick gray clouds. Jake Morrison gripped his seat as alarms screamed throughout the cabin. Red warning lights flashed everywhere, painting the metal walls in an angry glow. The ship's computer spoke in a calm voice that did not match the chaos around them. Hull breach detected. Emergency landing protocols initiated. Jake looked across the cabin at his 3 alien companions. Commander Zethkar's yellow eyes were wide with fear. The tall reptilian being's green scales had turned pale, something Jake had never seen before in their 6 months of working together. The commander's clawed hands moved quickly over his wrist device, trying to contact their home base. Dr. Valtana sat perfectly still in the corner. Her crystal body caught the red emergency lights and threw them around the cabin like a disco ball, but Jake could see cracks forming along her arms and shoulders. When crystalline beings got stressed, their bodies showed it immediately. Her normally clear voice now sounded like breaking glass. "The atmospheric readings are all wrong," she said. "This planet should not have storms like this." Navigator Kicksmith made clicking sounds with his mandibles. The insect-like alien's 6 arms moved in patterns that Jake had learned meant extreme anxiety. His large compound eyes reflected the flashing lights as he stared at his navigation screens. Lost contact. With orbital station, Kicksmith clicked. Storm interference too strong. Cannot send distress signal. Jake felt the ship lurch to one side. Through the small window, he could see nothing but gray clouds and rain. The water hit the glass so hard it sounded like bullets. He had seen bad weather on Earth, but this looked different. The rain fell in sheets so thick they blocked out everything else. "Everyone hold on," Jake called out as the ship shuddered again. Commander Zithkar's environmental suit began beeping. Jake watched as the reptilian's breathing became faster and more shallow. Zethkar came from a desert planet where the temperature never dropped below 90 degrees. His people had built their entire civilization around staying warm and dry. "My suit's heating system is failing," Zethkar said through clenched teeth. "The moisture is getting into the circuits." Dr. Valtana's crystalline form began to dim. Jake knew that her people needed very specific atmospheric conditions to stay healthy. Too much humidity could cause their molecular structure to become unstable. She was already showing signs of stress. The ship hit the ground with a sound like thunder. Jake felt his body slam against his safety harness as they skidded across what felt like mud. Metal screamed against rock and dirt. Sparks flew from broken control panels. The lights went out, leaving them in darkness except for the occasional flash of lightning outside. When everything finally stopped moving, Jake hung upside down in his seat. His head hurt, and he could taste blood in his mouth, but he could move all his arms and legs. That was good. He released his harness and dropped to what was now the ceiling of the tilted ship. "Is everyone alive?" He called out. Zethkar groaned. From somewhere in the darkness. "I am functional, but my suit is completely dead. No heat, no air filtration, nothing. Present and accounted for." Valtana's voice rang out, but it sounded weaker than before. "However, my structural integrity is compromised. These humidity levels are extremely dangerous for my species." Kicksmoth made rapid clicking sounds. Navigation. Systems destroyed. Communications destroyed. Life support systems destroyed. We are completely cut off. Jake found an emergency light and switched it on. The small beam showed him a cabin filled with broken equipment and scattered supplies. Water was already dripping through cracks in the hull. The air felt cold and damp, like being inside a refrigerator that someone had left open. He looked at his companions and felt his heart sink. Zethkar was shivering uncontrollably, his scales now completely pale. Without his environmental suit, the cold-blooded reptilian was in serious trouble. Jake could see his breath in the cold air. Dr. Veltana looked even worse. The cracks in her crystal body had spread, and she was barely glowing now. Her people were like living gemstones, but they needed perfect conditions to maintain their form. Too much moisture, and they could literally dissolve. Kixmoth had curled up into a ball, his exoskeleton clicking as he shivered. His species came from a warm, dry world where they lived in underground hives. Surface moisture was poisonous to them, and Jake could see green fluid leaking from the joints in his armor. Jake, on the other hand, felt cold, but not dangerously so. His jumpsuit was wet, but his body was already working to keep him warm. He could feel his muscles tensing to generate heat. His heart was beating faster to pump warm blood through his system. These were automatic responses that his body had been doing since he was born. "We need to get out of here," Jake said. "This ship isn't safe." "Out there?" Zither pointed toward the sound of rain hammering against the hull. "That is certain. Death for my kind." "Staying here is also death," Jake replied. "Look around. The hull is cracked, the life support is dead, and water is getting in. We need shelter, but not here." He moved to the emergency supply locker and started pulling out what he could find. Most of the high-tech equipment was broken or dead. The emergency shelters were designed to work with the ship's power systems, which were completely offline. The medical supplies were mostly intact, but they would not help with the environmental problems his friends were facing. Jake found some basic tools, emergency rations, and a few pieces of waterproof fabric. It was not much, but it was something. He also grabbed a small emergency beacon, though he doubted it would work in this storm. "I am going to scout outside," Jake said. "I need to find us a place to wait out this storm." "You cannot go out there," Veltana said, her voice now barely a whisper. "The atmospheric readings show humidity levels that are fatal to most species." "Maybe to most species," Jake said, pulling on a thin emergency jacket. "But humans are different. We evolved on a planet with crazy weather. Rain, snow, heat, cold. We learned to handle it all." He moved to the twisted door and forced it open. Immediately, cold rain poured into the cabin. The wind howled like a living thing, and Jake had to hold onto the doorframe to keep from being blown away. The world outside was gray and wild. Rain fell so hard that Jake could barely see 10 feet in any direction. The ground was thick mud that sucked at his boots with each step. Lightning flashed constantly, showing him glimpses of a rocky landscape dotted with twisted trees. Jake felt something his alien friends could not hope. Yes, it was cold and wet and miserable, but it was not beyond what a human could survive. His ancestors had lived through ice ages and floods and storms that lasted for months. This was just weather. He stepped back inside and closed the door. Against the wind. "There is high ground about 50 yards to the east," he said. "I can see some rock formations that might give us shelter. But we need to move now, before it gets dark." His 3 companions looked at him like he had suggested they jump off a cliff. "You want us to go out there?" Zethkar said. "In this storm?" "I want us to live," Jake replied simply. "And we cannot do that in here." Jake helped his 3 alien companions out of the wrecked ship and into the storm. The rain hit them like a wall of ice water. Zethkar collapsed to his knees within seconds, his reptilian body going into shock from the cold. Dr. Veltana moved. Like she was walking through thick honey, her crystal form growing dimmer with each step. Kixmoth made horrible clicking sounds as water seeped into his exoskeleton. "Stay close to me," Jake shouted over the wind. "Do not let go of my hand." The journey to the rocky outcrop took 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. Jake had to half-carry Zethkar, whose cold-blooded system was shutting down. Veltana stumbled along beside them, her normally bright crystal body now barely glowing. Kixmoth brought up the rear. his 6 legs slipping in the mud with each step. When they finally reached the rocks, Jake found a small cave that was barely big enough for all 4 of them. It was not much, but it was dry. Jake helped his companions inside and then stood at the entrance, looking back at their crashed ship. The aliens huddled together in the back of the cave, shivering and making sounds of distress. Jake knew they were expecting him to produce some kind of high-tech solution to their problems. After all, humans were supposed to be the junior partners in this galactic alliance. They were the newcomers, the ones who still used primitive technology compared to the great alien civilizations. But their advanced technology was not going to help them now. Jake rolled up his sleeves and walked back out into the rain. He ignored the shocked sounds his companions made behind him. They probably thought he had lost his mind. Maybe he had. But crazy or not, he had work to do. The first thing he needed was fire. Everything was wet, but Jake had learned a long time ago that there was always something that could burn if he knew where to look. He searched around the base of the rocky outcrop until he found what he was looking for. A dead tree that had fallen against the rocks, creating a small pocket that was sheltered from the worst of the rain. Jake broke off pieces of the driest wood he could find and carried them back to the cave. His alien friends watched in confusion as he arranged the wood in a small pile near the entrance. Then he began the slow process of making fire the old-fashioned way. "What are you doing?" Veltana asked, her voice weak and distorted. "Making fire," Jake said simply. He had found 2 pieces of dry wood and was rubbing them together rapidly. "But we have no ignition systems," Zethkar said through chattering teeth. "Our equipment is all dead." "Then we make fire without equipment," Jake replied. It took him 15 minutes of steady work, but eventually he got a small wisp of smoke, then a tiny ember. He carefully fed it with the driest tinder he could find until he had a small but steady flame. The alien stared at the fire like it was magic. "How did you do that?" Kicksmouth clicked. "Fire from nothing but wood?" "Not from nothing," Jake said. "From friction. Heat from movement. Basic physics." But he could see from their faces that it was not basic to them. These species had all developed advanced technology before they learned to make fire without tools. To them, what Jake had just done was impossible. The fire was small, but it was enough to take the worst edge off the cold. Jake could see his companions starting to warm up slightly. But he knew it was not enough. They needed better shelter, food, and water. Jake went back outside and began gathering materials. The aliens watched through the cave entrance as he collected pieces of metal from their crashed ship, strips of fabric, and anything else that might be useful. He worked quickly and efficiently, his body temperature regulated by constant movement. "He is going to die out there," Zethkar said. "No being can survive in those conditions for long." But Jake kept working. He had found a large piece of the ship's hull that was relatively intact. Using rocks as hammers and broken metal as tools, he began shaping it into a crude but effective windbreak. The work was hard, and his hands were getting cut and bruised. But his body was staying warm from the exercise. After 2 hours of work, Jake had constructed a rough lean-to shelter against the cave entrance. It was not pretty, but it blocked most of the wind and rain from getting into their small cave. The temperature inside went up by at least 10 degrees. "Impossible," Veltana whispered. He built that with his bare hands. Jake was not done yet. He had noticed that water was collecting in small pools around the rocks. Using pieces of fabric and metal, he created a simple but effective water collection system that funneled rainwater into their emergency containers. Clean drinking water was not going to be a problem. Next came food. Jake knew that most alien species had very specific dietary requirements. But he also knew that in a survival situation, you ate what you could find. He ventured out into the storm again and began searching for anything edible. The planet had plant life, though it was different from anything on Earth. Jake used his knowledge of basic botany to identify which plants might be safe to eat. He looked for certain leaf patterns, examined root systems, and even carefully tasted small amounts to test for obvious toxins. When he returned to the cave with an armload of various plants, roots, and what looked like some kind of fruit, his companions stared at him in disbelief. "You cannot eat that," Zethkar said. "We have no way to test if it is safe." "I already tested it," Jake said. "Small amounts first, and larger amounts. My digestive system can handle most organic compounds. Yours might not be able to, but we can try mixing small amounts with our emergency rations to stretch them out." Jake began preparing the plant matter, cleaning it, and arranging it near the fire to dry. He showed his companions how to identify which parts of each plant were most likely to be edible and which to avoid. "Your species does this regularly?" Kixmoth asked. "Eat unknown plants?" "Our ancestors did it for thousands of years," Jake said. "We evolved to be omnivores. We can eat almost anything organic and extract nutrition from it. Most animals can only eat specific things. Humans can eat everything." The aliens were starting to understand that their human companion was not just lucky or crazy. He was demonstrating abilities that their advanced civilizations had never needed to develop. When you could control your environment completely, you never learned to adapt to harsh conditions. But Jake was not trying to control the environment. He was adapting to it. As the hours passed, the small cave became more comfortable. The fire provided heat and light. The water collection system provided clean drinking water. The crude shelter kept out most of the wind and rain. Jake had even found some soft plant matter that could serve as bedding. "I do not understand," Veltana said. Her crystal body had stopped losing its glow and was actually starting to brighten slightly in the warmer, drier air. "Your species has interstellar travel. You have advanced computers and energy weapons. Why do you also know these primitive skills?" Jake stirred the fire with a stick and considered the question. "Because our technology grew out of these skills," he said finally. "Every human learns basic survival techniques as children. We learn to make fire, find food, build shelter, and work with our hands. Even our most advanced scientists know how to do these things. We never forgot where we came from." Zethkar had stopped shivering and was now sitting closer to the fire. "My people developed climate control systems millions of years ago. We have not needed to adapt to harsh environments in all that time. Same with my species," Kixmoth clicked. "We live in controlled hive environments. Temperature, humidity, air pressure, everything is regulated. And my people exist in perfect crystalline matrices," Daltana added. "We shape our environment to match our needs exactly." Jake nodded. "That is smart. But it also makes you dependent on your technology. When the technology fails, you have no backup plan." He looked around at his three companions. They were still in bad shape, but they were alive. And for the first time since the crash, it looked like they might stay that way. "Humans are different," Jake continued. "We learn to survive in changing environments before we learn to control them. Hot, cold, wet, dry, we can adapt to almost anything. It is not the best way to live, but it is the most reliable way to survive." Outside, the storm continued to rage. But inside their small cave, 4 beings from 4 different worlds huddled around a fire made from sticks and stayed alive through the long, cold night. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. Jake woke up on the morning of the 4th day to find his alien companions in worse condition than before. Dr. Veltana's crystal body was covered in stress fractures that spread like spider webs across her arms and torso. Commander Zethkar lay curled in a ball near the fire, his breathing slow and shallow. Navigator Kicksmouth had stopped moving entirely, his exoskeleton making weak clicking sounds every few minutes. Jake felt tired and hungry, but he was still functional. His body had adjusted to the cold and damp conditions. His human metabolism was working overtime to keep him warm and alert. While his friends were slowly dying from exposure, Jake was adapting. He crawled over to check on Zethkar. First, the reptilian scales felt cold and dry. His yellow eyes opened when Jake touched his shoulder. "I am dying," Zethkar whispered. "My body temperature has dropped too low. My organs are shutting down." Jake knew this was true. Reptilian species from desert worlds could not survive extended cold periods. Their metabolism simply stopped working when their body temperature dropped below a certain point. "No, you are not dying," Jake said firmly. "You are going to survive this. All of you are." He moved over to Dr. Veltana, her normally bright crystal. Body was now dim and cloudy. When he touched her arm, he could feel the cracks in her molecular structure. "The humidity is breaking down my cellular matrix," she said in a voice like breaking glass. "My people cannot survive more than a few days in these conditions. I estimate I have perhaps 12 hours before complete structural collapse." Jake looked at Kicksmouth. The insectoid navigator was the worst off. Green fluid was leaking from multiple points in his exoskeleton. His compound eyes were clouded over, and his breathing was barely detectable. Respiratory system compromised. Kicksmouth managed to click weakly. Water infiltration causing organ failure. Cannot continue much longer. Jake sat back and looked at his 3 dying friends. They were all brilliant beings from advanced civilizations. They had technology that could cross between stars, weapons that could destroy planets, and medical knowledge that could cure diseases that had plagued their species for millions of years. But none of that helped them now. Jake stood up and walked to the cave entrance. The storm was still raging outside, but it did not look as fierce as it had the first day. The rain was still heavy, but the wind had died down some. Lightning still flashed regularly, but the thunder was not as loud. To Jake, these were good signs. The storm was weakening. They just had to survive a little longer. He turned back to his companions and made a decision. "I am going to tell you something that might help you understand why I am not dying like you are," Jake said. "And maybe it will help you find ways to survive this." The 3 aliens looked at him with what little attention they could manage. "Humans come from a planet called Earth," Jake began. "Earth is not a nice planet. The temperature changes constantly. We have ice ages that last for thousands of years, followed by warm periods that melt all the ice. We have storms that can destroy entire cities. We have deserts that can kill you in hours and forests, so thick you can get lost forever." Jake began pacing back and forth, his movement helping to keep his body temperature up. But the worst thing about Earth is that it never stays the same. The climate changes. The weather changes. Even the land changes. Mountains rise up and disappear. Rivers change direction. What is a forest today might be a desert tomorrow. Zethkar managed to lift his head slightly. "How did your species survive?" "Such chaos?" "By becoming adaptable," Jake said. "We could not control our environment like your species did. So we learned to change ourselves to match whatever environment we found ourselves in." Jake held up his hands. "Look at these. Human hands are not as strong as yours, Zethkar. They are not as precise as yours, Veltana. They do not have as many joints as yours, Kicksmouth. But they can do a little bit of everything. We can grip, we can manipulate small objects, we can use tools, we can even fight if we have to." He pointed to his legs. "Human legs are not as fast as most species. We cannot jump as high or run as quickly. But we can walk farther than almost any other creature. We can keep moving for hours or even days without stopping. We can climb. We can swim. We can even run on ice and snow. Jake tapped his chest. Human bodies are not specialized for any one environment. We do not have thick fur for cold weather or special glands for hot weather. Instead, we have a system that can adjust to almost anything. When it is cold, our bodies shiver to generate heat. When it is hot, we sweat to cool down. Our heart rate changes, our breathing changes, even our blood flow changes to match what we need. Dr. Veltana's dim form flickered slightly. You are saying that humans evolved to be ... generalists? Exactly, Jake said. Every other species we have met is specialized. You are all very good at living in specific conditions. But when those conditions change, you cannot adapt quickly enough. He gestured toward the storm outside. This planet has conditions that are close to what humans can survive. Not comfortable, but survivable. For you, these conditions are deadly because they are so different from what your bodies are designed for. Jake knelt down next to Zethkar. Your people evolved on a desert world with constant temperature and very little water. Your bodies are perfect for that environment. But here, with cold and wetness, your metabolism cannot function. He moved to Veltana. Your species exists in perfect crystalline environments with exact temperature and humidity controls. Any deviation from those conditions causes structural damage to your molecular matrix. Finally, he looked at Kixmoth. Your people live in underground hives with filtered air and controlled atmospheric pressure. Surface moisture is poison too. Your respiratory system. Jake stood up again. But humans evolved in changing conditions. We lived through ice ages and heat waves and floods and droughts. We had to learn to survive in forests and deserts and mountains and plains. Our bodies learned to handle whatever nature threw at us. So you are saying we are doomed because we are too specialized, Zethkar said weakly. No, Jake replied. I'm saying you need to learn to think like humans. You cannot change your bodies, but you can change how you use them. Jake went over to their supply pile and pulled out some of the materials he had gathered. Zethkar, your body cannot generate heat like mine can, but you can trap the heat you do produce. Watch. Jake began wrapping strips of fabric around Zethkar's torso and limbs, creating layers of insulation. Human Arctic explorers learned this thousands of years ago. If you cannot make heat, you must keep the heat you have from escaping. Next, he turned to Veltana. Your crystalline structure is breaking down from humidity, but humidity is just water in the air. We can reduce the humidity around you. Jake began constructing a small tent-like structure around her using waterproof fabric. This will not eliminate the moisture, but it will reduce it enough to slow the damage. Finally, he looked at Kixmoth. Your respiratory system cannot handle the moisture in the air, but you can filter the air before it enters your system. Jake took some of the plant fibers he had collected and began weaving them into a crude but effective filter. Breathe through this. It will remove some of the water from the air before it reaches your lungs. As Jake worked to help his companions, he continued talking. The secret of human survival is not that we are stronger or smarter than other species. We are not. The secret is that we never stopped adapting. Even after we developed technology, we kept learning primitive skills. Even after we built cities, we remembered how to live in the wilderness. Even after we reached the stars, we still taught our children how to make fire with sticks. Zethkar was already breathing easier in his improvised insulation layers. Why? Do you do that? Why not just rely on your technology? Jake smiled. Because we learned a long time ago that technology can fail. Storms can destroy your equipment. Accidents can strand you in hostile environments. Wars can cut off your supply lines. When that happens, you fall back on the skills that do not require any technology at all. Dr. Valtana's voice was stronger. From inside her humidity shelter, "Your species maintains redundant survival systems." "In a way, yes," Jake said. "We have technology, but we also have biology. We have tools, but we also have hands. We have computers, but we also have brains. That can solve problems without any equipment." Jake looked around at his three companions. They were still in serious condition, but they were no longer dying. The simple modifications he had made to their situation were buying them time. "That is the human advantage," Jake said. "We are not the best at anything specific, but we are good enough at everything to survive almost anywhere." Outside, the storm continued, but inside the cave, four very different beings from four different worlds were learning what it meant to be human. On the fifth day, the storm finally began to weaken. Jake woke to find that the constant drumming of rain on their shelter had become a lighter patter. The wind no longer howled like a living thing, and he could actually see more than a few feet. Outside the cave entrance, his alien companions were still alive, which was better than he had hoped 3 days ago. The modifications he had made to their shelter and the primitive survival techniques he had taught them were working. Not perfectly, but well enough to keep them breathing. Commander Zethkar was the first to show real improvement. The layers of insulation Jake had wrapped around him were trapping his body heat effectively. His metabolism was still running slower than normal, but it was no longer shutting down. His yellow eyes were clearer, and he could move around the cave without collapsing. "I never understood how insulation worked," Zethkar said, as Jake checked the fabric wrappings around his arms. "My people have always used active heating systems. The idea of passive heat retention is ... strange to us." Jake smiled as he adjusted. "One of the wraps. Human children learn about insulation before they learn to read. We live on a planet where the temperature can change by 50 degrees in a single day. If we could not keep our body heat, we would have gone extinct millions of years ago." Dr. Veltana was also doing better. The small humidity shelter Jake had built around her was not perfect, but it had reduced the moisture in her immediate environment enough to stop the worst of the structural damage to her crystalline body. The cracks in her arms and torso had stopped spreading, and her natural glow was beginning to return. "The physics of what you did should not work," Beltana said from inside her shelter. "A simple fabric barrier cannot create a significant humidity differential." "It does not have to be perfect," Jake explained. "It just has to be better than what we had before. Sometimes the difference between life and death is not a huge change. Sometimes it is just a small improvement that gives your body time to adapt." Navigator. Kixmoth was the most fragile of the three, but even he was showing signs of recovery. The air filter Jake had made from plant fibers was crude, but it was removing enough moisture from the air to allow Kixmoth's respiratory system to function. The green fluid had stopped leaking from his exoskeleton joints, and his compound eyes were beginning to clear. "Impossible," Kixmoth clicked weakly. "Plant matter cannot filter atmospheric moisture with any efficiency." "It does not have to be efficient," Jake said as he replaced the filter with a fresh one. "It just has to help a little bit. Your body can handle some moisture. The problem was that you were getting too much at once. By reducing the amount even slightly, your natural systems can cope with the rest." As the day wore on, Jake began teaching his companions more advanced survival techniques. He showed Zethkar how to use controlled movement to generate body heat without exhausting himself. The reptilian learned to do simple exercises that increased his circulation without burning too much energy. "On my world, we conserve energy by remaining still," Zethkar said as he practiced the movements Jake had taught him. "This concept of using energy to create energy is backwards to everything I know." "That is because your world provides consistent heat," Jake replied. "On Earth, The environment does not give us what we need. We have to create it ourselves. Movement generates heat. Heat keeps us alive. It is a cycle that has to be maintained constantly. Jake taught Dr. Veltana how to recognize and avoid high humidity areas within their small shelter. Her species had never needed to think about atmospheric moisture before, but she was a quick learner. She began to understand how air moved through their cave and how to position herself to stay in the driest spots. Your species must have very sophisticated understanding of fluid dynamics, Veltana observed. The way you read air currents and moisture patterns is quite advanced. We do not think of it as advanced, Jake said. We think of it as normal. Every human knows how to read weather patterns, air movement, and humidity changes. We have to know these things to survive outdoors. Jake spent the most time with Kixmoth, whose respiratory system was the most damaged. He taught the insectoid navigator breathing techniques that would help clear moisture from his lung cavities. He showed him how to position his body to allow better drainage of accumulated fluids. These techniques, Kixmoth clicked slowly, they are not technological. They are purely biological. Yes, Jake agreed, but they work. Your people never needed to develop them because you always lived in controlled environments. Humans had to learn them because we had no choice. As evening approached, Jake decided it was time to expand their survival capabilities. The storm was weakening, and he wanted to be ready to move if necessary. He began teaching his companions how to identify useful materials in their environment. Everything around us can be used for something, Jake explained as he led them to the cave entrance. The trick is knowing what to look for and how to use it. He pointed to different types of rocks near the entrance. These smooth stones can be used to shape metal. These rough ones can be used to sharpen tools. These flat ones can be used as cutting surfaces or cooking platforms. Jake showed them how to identify different types of plant matter. These leaves are waterproof and can be used for shelter. These roots are edible and can provide nutrition. These fibers can be woven into rope or fabric. Zethkar found this particularly interesting. You are saying that primitive materials can replace advanced technology? Not replace, Jake corrected. Supplement. Technology is wonderful when it works. But when it fails, you need backup systems. Primitive materials and techniques are the ultimate backup system because they never run out of power or break down. Dr. Veltana was fascinated by Jake's knowledge of plant chemistry. How do you know which plants are safe to consume? Trial and error over thousands of years, Jake said, plus some basic rules that work for most organic compounds. Look for certain color patterns, test small amounts first, observe how other animals react to the plants, and always have a backup plan if you guess wrong. Jake began teaching them how to improve their shelter. He showed them how to weave plant fibers together to create stronger fabric. He demonstrated how to use mud and clay as waterproofing agents. He taught them how to construct simple tools using only materials they could find around them. The key is to always think in terms of function rather than form, Jake explained as he helped Zethkar weave a crude but effective mat. It does not have to look pretty. It just has to work. As night fell, Jake made another important decision. He began teaching his companions how to maintain their fire without his help. Fire was critical to their survival, but if something happened to him, they needed to be able to keep it going. Fire is not just heat and light, Jake said as he showed them how to select the right wood and arrange it properly. Fire is hope. As long as you have fire, you can survive almost anything. It can keep you warm, cook your food, purify your water, and signal for help. Zethkar struggled with the concept at first. His people had never needed to make fire manually. But with Jake's patient instruction, he eventually managed to add wood to the fire without extinguishing it. I am beginning to understand, Zethkar said as he watched the flames dance. Fire is a tool, but it is also a living thing. It must be fed and cared for. Dr. Veltana was better at managing the fire than Zethkar, but she was still learning. The chemical processes involved are fascinating, she said. Combustion is such a simple reaction, but it requires constant attention to maintain. Kixmoth had the most difficulty with fire management. His species had an instinctive fear of open flames. But Jake worked with him patiently, showing him how to use tools to manage the fire without getting too close to it. Your people must have overcome similar fears. Kixmoth clicked. How did humans learn to trust fire? We learned that fire is not our enemy, Jake replied. It is a powerful force that can hurt us if we are careless. But it can also save our lives if we treat it with respect. The key is understanding the balance. As the night wore on, Jake felt a sense of cautious optimism. His three companions were not just surviving anymore. They were learning. They were beginning to understand the principles that had kept humanity alive through countless disasters and catastrophes. There is something I want to show you, Jake said as he pulled out their emergency beacon. This device was designed to send a distress signal to any ships in orbit. But the storm has been interfering with all electronic signals. He held up the beacon and pointed to its simple LED display. See this? It shows that the atmospheric interference is starting to decrease. The storm is definitely weakening. Zethkar looked at the device with interest. Does this mean rescue is coming? Maybe, Jake said, but we cannot count on it. Rescue might come tomorrow, or it might come in a week. We have to be prepared to survive on our own for as long as necessary. Jake began teaching them about long-term survival planning. Short-term survival is about staying alive for a few days. Long-term survival is about creating sustainable systems that can keep you alive indefinitely. He showed them how to expand their water collection system to gather more rainwater. He taught them how to preserve food for longer periods using smoke and salt. He demonstrated how to create more durable tools that would. Jake woke on the 7th day to the sound of engines overhead. The storm had finally broken during the night, leaving behind clear skies and weak sunlight streaming through their cave entrance. He sat up quickly and listened carefully. Yes, those were definitely spacecraft engines, and they were getting closer. Everyone wake up, Jake called to his companions. I think our rescue has arrived. Zethkar was the first to respond, moving much more easily than he had been able to a few days earlier. The insulation techniques Jake had taught him were still keeping his body temperature stable. Are you certain? Jake stepped outside the cave and looked up at the sky. 3 ships were circling overhead, clearly searching for survivors. One of them was already beginning to descend toward their position. Definitely rescue ships, Jake confirmed. Looks like our emergency beacon finally got through. Dr. Veltana emerged from her humidity shelter, moving slowly but steadily. Her crystalline body was still showing stress fractures, but the worst of the damage had been halted. I must admit, I did not expect to survive long enough to see this moment. Kixmoth crawled out last, his movements still labored but much improved from 3 days ago. The air filtration system Jake had created for him was still working, and his respiratory system had had time to begin healing itself. Agreed. Without Jake's intervention, we would all have perished within the first day. Jake began gathering their equipment and supplies. We should collect everything we made here. The rescue teams will want to study how we survived. As the first rescue ship landed in a clearing about 50 yards from their cave, Jake felt a mixture of relief and pride. Relief that they would soon be safe and back in civilization. Pride that he had managed to keep his 3 alien friends alive through one of the worst survival situations he had ever faced. The rescue team consisted of both humans and aliens from several different species. They approached the cave cautiously, not sure what condition the survivors would be in after a week in the storm. Captain Lisa Martinez, the human leader of the rescue team, was the first to reach them. She looked around at their primitive but effective shelter with obvious amazement. "Dr. Morrison?" she called out. "Are you and your team injured?" "We are all alive and functional," Jake replied. "Injured, yes, but nothing that cannot be treated. My companions have been through a severe ordeal, but they should recover fully with proper medical attention." The rescue team's medic, a tall alien with blue skin and 4 arms, immediately began examining the survivors. Dr. Kethfall was known throughout the galaxy as one of the best emergency physicians in the space service. "Fascinating," Dr. Kethfall said as he scanned Zethkar with his medical instruments. "Commander, your body temperature is low and your metabolism is running slower than normal, but your vital signs are stable. How did you survive the hypothermic conditions?" Zethkar gestured toward Jake. "Dr. Morrison taught me techniques for conserving and trapping body heat. Without his knowledge, I would have died from cold blood shock within hours." Dr. Kethfall moved to examine Veltana next. "Dr. Veltana, you show significant structural damage consistent with humidity exposure, but the progression has been halted. Your molecular matrix should heal completely with proper crystalline therapy. How did you prevent complete breakdown?" "Jake created a microenvironment that reduced atmospheric moisture in my immediate vicinity," Veltana explained. "He used primitive materials to achieve what our advanced technology could not." When the medic examined Kixmoth, his 4 eyes widened in surprise. "Navigator, you have clear signs of respiratory moisture infiltration, but your lung function is much better than I would expect. There is evidence of systematic clearing of fluid buildup. How is this possible?" Kixmoth clicked weakly, but clearly. "Jake constructed filtration systems and taught me breathing techniques that allowed my natural healing processes to function despite the hostile atmospheric conditions." Dr. Kethfall stood up and looked at Jake with new respect. "Dr. Morrison, what you accomplished here is remarkable. All 3 of your companions should have died from environmental exposure within the first day. Yet somehow you kept them alive for a full week, using nothing but primitive materials and basic survival techniques." Captain Martinez was examining their shelter and equipment with obvious fascination. "Dr. Morrison, can you walk me through what you did here? This will need to be documented for the survival training archives." Jake spent the next hour explaining everything he had built and every technique he had used. The rescue team recorded everything, from the fire-making methods to the water collection systems to the specialized shelters he had created for each alien's specific physiological needs. The key was not trying to recreate their home environments, Jake explained. It was finding ways to make this environment survivable for their biology. Small changes that their bodies could adapt to, rather than major changes that required technology we did not have. As they prepared to leave the planet, Captain Martinez made an official log entry about the rescue. Survivor report: 4-person survey team crashed on Kepler 442c during severe storm conditions. Human team member Dr. Jake Morrison successfully maintained survival conditions for all team members using primitive techniques and improvised equipment. No fatalities. All survivors expected to make full recovery. But Jake knew that the real story was more complex than any official report could capture. During the flight back to the orbital station, word of their survival began to spread throughout the galactic community. Within hours, requests for interviews and documentation were pouring in from research institutions, military organizations, and survival training facilities across dozens of star systems. Commander Zethkar was the first to understand the broader implications of what had happened. "Jake," he said as they sat in the ship's medical bay, "what you did down there is going to change how the galaxy thinks about humans. What do you mean? Jake asked. For decades, humans have been seen as the junior partners in galactic civilization, Zethkar explained. You have impressive technology, and you learn quickly. But every other species assumed that humans were just another advanced civilization that happened to develop space travel. Dr. Veltana nodded, her crystal body now glowing brightly in the ship's controlled environment. But what you demonstrated on that planet was not advanced technology. It was something far more valuable, true adaptability. Kicksmith, breathing easily now that he was back in filtered air, added his own observations. My people have been spacefaring for over 10 million years. In all that time, we have encountered hundreds of intelligent species. All of them achieved their advancement by specializing in controlling their environments. But humans are different. Veltana continued. You achieved advancement while maintaining your ability to survive in uncontrolled environments. You never gave up the skills that kept your species alive before you had technology. Jake was beginning to understand what they were getting at. You are saying that most species become dependent on their technology. Exactly, Zethkar said, and humans have not. You have technology, but you are not helpless without it. That makes you incredibly valuable as partners and allies. Over the following weeks, as they recovered at the orbital medical station, Jake watched as his simple survival story became something much larger. Research teams from across the galaxy came to study his techniques. Military strategists wanted to understand how human adaptability could be applied to combat situations. Colony planners wanted to know how human survival skills could help in terraforming operations. Dr. Veltana was the first to publish her findings. Her research paper, titled Human Adaptive Capacity, Survival Advantages in Uncontrolled Environments, became required reading at every major scientific institution in the galaxy. Commander Zethkar submitted a formal recommendation to the Galactic Military Council that all interspecies exploration and combat teams include human members specifically for their survival capabilities. His report led to the creation of the Human Survival Specialist Program, which trained humans to serve as survival experts for mixed species operations. Navigator Kicksmith updated the Galactic Navigation database to include detailed notes about human endurance capabilities and survival skills. His work led to new exploration protocols that took advantage of human adaptability to survey planets that had previously been considered too hostile for intelligent life. But perhaps the most important change was in how humans saw themselves. For the first time since joining the galactic community, humans realized that they brought something unique and valuable to the table. They were not just another advanced species trying to catch up with older civilizations. They were the species that could survive anywhere and adapt to anything. Jake returned to his research work, but with a new understanding of his role in the galaxy. He was no longer just a xenobiologist studying alien life forms. He was a representative of human resilience and adaptability. 6 months later, Jake received a message that made him smile. It was from a young human named Kevin Walsh, who had just graduated from the new Galactic Survival Academy that had been established based on Jake's techniques. Dr. Morrison, the message read, I wanted to thank you for showing the galaxy what humans are really capable of. Because of your example, humans are now leading Sioux.